Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The federal government confirmed that 3 Canadians were killed following the vicious attack by Hamas in Gaza over the weekend. The death toll has risen to 2,100 as Israel continues to pound the Gaza region since Saturday's brutal attacks. And 4 Lethbridge teenage football players have been charged with sexual assault following an incident which occurred last Tuesday at Chinook High School.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly is not confirming whether Hamas terrorists are holding any Canadians hostage. She did say, however, that 3 Canadians are still missing, including Vivian Silver and Tiferet Lapido. 3 Canadians were also killed following Saturday's horrific terrorist attack in Gaza. They're Alexander Luk, Ben Mizrachi, and Adi Vital Kaploun. Minister Joly says Ottawa will begin to airlift Canadian citizens and permanent residents from Tel Aviv by the end of the week. She says Canadian Armed Forces flights will be arranged in the coming days, and the government will help arrange flights to Canada.
The pain and suffering that we continue to bear witness to cannot be measured. Young lives have been cut short, families have been ripped apart, and it is absolutely heartbreaking. We'll begin the assisted departure of Canadians from Tel Aviv in the coming days by the end of the week with the help of aircraft from the Canadian Armed Forces. They will arrive in Tel Aviv and bring Canadians to Athens. My colleague, Pablo Rodriguez, and I have been working on the next steps from there. Together, we have secured with Air Canada a plane and a crew to bring Canadians home from Athens.
Global Affairs Canada says there were just over 3,000 Canadians registered with the embassy in Israel and around 500 registered in Gaza and the West Bank. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre spoke out about the atrocities in Gaza. Poilievre says the terrorist group Hamas needs to be held accountable following the slaughter of so many innocent civilians last weekend. He says Canada can do its part by imposing sanctions on Iran, which supports Hamas.
Hamas is a sadistic, genocidal, terrorist death cult, and it must be stopped. And unfortunately, its evil and odious conduct is responsible for all of the suffering that we witness right now. So Conservatives call for the government to take action to counter Hamas any way we can. And one way would be to impose more severe sanctions on Iran, which is the sponsor of Hamas.
U.S. President Joe Biden says his government is continuing to monitor the situation in Gaza closely since attacks by Hamas left so many people dead. Now, in retaliation, Israel's military has been pounding the Gaza region with rockets. Biden says his country's commitment to Israel's security is unshakable.
This attack has brought to the surface the painful memories and scars left by a millennia of anti-Semitism and genocide against the Jewish people. And this moment, we have to be crystal clear. There is no justification for terrorism, no excuse, and the type of terrorism that was exhibited here is just beyond the pale, beyond the pale. As I said yesterday, my commitment to Israel's security and the safety of the Jewish people is unshakable. The United States has Israel's back, and we're going to be working on this all through today and beyond.
Israeli airstrikes continue to hit targets in the Gaza region in retaliation for the attacks by Hamas terrorists. Around 250 young people were slaughtered during a music festival in Gaza. One of the areas recently hit by Israeli rockets was the Jab Aliyah refugee camp. It is located in the northern part of the coastal enclave. The war between Israel and Hamas has already claimed around 2,100 lives on both sides and is expected to escalate. Meanwhile, an Israeli village near the Gaza border lies in ruins filled with the bodies of both Hamas terrorists and civilians.
It's not a war. It's not a battlefield. You see the babies, the mother, the fathers in their bedrooms, in their protection rooms, and how the terrorists kill them. It's not a war. It's not a battlefield. It's a massacre. It's a terror activity. So you can look it about on yourself. It's something that I never saw in my life.
The shockwaves of the attacks in Israel can be felt close to home here in Alberta. Menachem Matusov, a senior rabbi with Chabad Lethbridge, Alberta, has only one word to describe how the community is handling the tragedy right now.
Terrible. Everyone has family members, everyone has friends, never mind in Israel, throughout the world, Israelis, Canadians, people from all over. I have nephews and nieces, I have cousins, I don't have children there. One of our rabbis here in Calgary has parents and siblings, people in our community who are now went for a vacation to our Holy Land and are stuck there and are suffering with it.
Rabbi Matusov adds that he believes many Muslim children have been brainwashed by Hamas and their extremist ideology. Canada's National Defence Minister Bill Blair spoke about Canada's continuing support of Ukraine in its war with Russia. Blair is in Brussels ahead of a two-day meeting with his NATO counterparts. Blair says Canada's support for Ukraine is unwavering, both in the past and in the future.
Of course, President Zelensky was in my country in Canada just a few weeks ago, where we announced a significant new contribution of $650 million in light armored vehicles and armored Medivac vehicles. And today we'll also be announcing some additional winter supplies, some additional ammunition from our country. And I know, first of all, the President will, I'm sure, provide us with an update of the current military situation in the Ukraine. And then there'll be, as the UNDG always does, we'll have a robust discussion on how we can help them.
In total, Canada's latest contributions include $25 million worth of winter clothing and equipment for Ukraine. The criminal trial for Freedom Convoy protester Chris Barber continued in Ottawa. Barber faces a long list of charges including mischief, intimidation, obstructing a highway, and obstructing a police officer. According to the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, which is representing the owner of the Saskatchewan Trucking Company, the trial, which began on September 5th, was supposed to run for 16 days, but was paused after 13 days. The JCCF says the reason was because the Crown was not ready to wrap up its case, and it became apparent more time was needed. The parties are working with the trial judge to schedule more court dates. Barber was arrested on February 17th of last year, days after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act during the Freedom Convoy. Well, we experienced more light drizzle in an overcast sky today, again in Lethbridge. Let's have a quick peek at the forecast with our weather analyst, Jeanette Roche. Jeanette, it looks like things may start to clear up by Friday.
Yeah, that's right. We are still looking at tonight and tomorrow with the rain and then clear skies by Friday as we get into our weekend. Overnight, though, we're looking at a low of 7 degrees. We could see a northwest wind at 20, gusting to 40 kilometers per hour. That should be lightening up after midnight. Also looking at that 30% chance of showers this evening. Those showers lasting into Thursday with that 30%, high of 13 degrees, still seasonable. And I'll be back later in the show to tell you how sunny the rest of the week is going to be.
Great, thanks so much. 4 members of a high school football team in Lethbridge have been charged with the sexual assault of a fellow player. Lethbridge police say on October the 3rd, a 16-year-old male was forcibly confined and sexually assaulted after school hours in a locker room at Chinook High School. The victim and those who allegedly assaulted him were all members of the same football team. Staff Sergeant Pete Christos with the LPS says it was the victim who came forward to police and reported the incident. He encourages anyone who's been the victim of sexual assault to speak out.
The victim, who was very courageous, came forward and reported to the police, and we took the investigation on from there. It really depends on the victim themselves. When it's appropriate and when they feel that they are able to speak about the incident, we encourage them to come forward and report to the police.
Police say they also seized a weapon that was used during the alleged assault. All 4 males, 2 age 17 and 2 age 16, are charged with sexual assault with a weapon and unlawful confinement. They will appear in youth court on October the 25th. A 50-year-old man has been charged following a domestic dispute at a Northside Lethbridge home on Sunday. Police say they received a call about a domestic assault at a residence on Lynx Crescent. They say the victim was able to leave the home, but the man armed with a firearm barricaded himself inside. Following a standoff with police, the man was taken into custody and police seized a loaded rifle. Police say since this involves domestic violence, the man cannot be identified. He does, however, face multiple charges, including assault with a weapon, uttering threats, and housebreak. RCMP and the Crow's Nest Pass say they caught a person on a motorcycle going almost twice the legal speed limit near the Frank Slide. Police say the motorcyclist was traveling 153 kilometers an hour when the individual was pulled over by a peace officer. The story was the rider was speeding to catch up to another motorcyclist who was traveling 101 kilometers an hour in an 80K zone. Police say the biker, who was riding 153 kilometers an hour, had a suspended driver's license. The bike was impounded, and the rider faces 2 mandatory court appearances. The City of Lethbridge has officially opened a brand new play space in Galt Gardens. The area, which is located by the Rotary Centennial Fountain, features inclusive play equipment, rubber surfacing, park furniture, and a plaza space. City Councillor Jen Schmidt-Rempel says this park is just one more step in helping to revitalize the downtown area.
It's our downtown core. It's a pride. It's a point of pride in our community, and we want to make sure that we are taking pride in our community, and we want to encourage people to come down, explore what we've got going on downtown. Festival Square was a key piece of that. The Third Avenue revitalization project was a key part of that. Revitalizing Galt Gardens, encouraging businesses to relocate downtown. It really just energizes the community. It gives the community a hub to look forward to and a hub to look towards.
Now, the park came to fruition through the Lethbridge Heart of Our City master plan. It was identified as a key feature that was lacking in the area for recreation.
With that, we saw an opportunity when the federal government was offering a grant to be able to create a space within the park that would activate and bring in that piece of recreational equipment. So we started the design work for this project back in 2021, 2022. And so to be able to see it built and here with kids on it today is a great accomplishment.
The city did secure $375,000 through the Canada Community Revitalization Fund to help build the project. It is a well-known fact that plants are a vital part of our ecosystem. Associate Professor of Botany at the University of Lethbridge, Jenny McCune, has created a short film called The Quiet Green Creatures, where she documents her study of the wood poppy. She also explains why some plant species in Canada are at risk of extinction.
In Canada, we have some close to 4,000 different species of vascular plants. And the major reason that some of them are at risk of extinction is because they grow mostly in the southern part of our country, which is also where we like to live and work. And so we've been clearing a lot of their habitat for centuries to make way for our housing, our agriculture, our industry, and things like that.
Professor McCune shares more about bringing awareness of endangered species in Canada. Watch for that interview coming up after Business News. Analog Books is hosting a brand new short story writing competition for high school students. An official with the bookstore says the competition came to be after they were approached by the Chancellor of the University of Lethbridge, Terry Whitehead, who suggested the idea of having an analog prize and having it be solely for high school students across southern Alberta. Penny Waris, the co-owner of Analog Books, explains the importance of encouraging students to write more.
We want to curate and cultivate an atmosphere where they feel free to submit a short story, and there's no cost to them. And just the idea that writers always write in their basement, and they're always introverts and all of that. But the idea that your story will actually get read, even if it's just by a dozen people, that's something that I think that generation doesn't realize is out there yet.
The deadline for submissions is February the 26th of next year. The award will be given out in May. The Remington Carriage Museum is the largest museum of its kind in the world. It is located in Cardston, Alberta, and features hundreds of horse-drawn vehicles on display. BCN's Micah Quinn chatted with staff about the large collection of carriages and the long history of this unique museum.
The Remington Carriage Collection is 349 vehicles, but here at the Remington Carriage Museum, we have 271 horse-drawn vehicles on display.
The museum opened its doors in June of 1993 and recently celebrated its 30th anniversary earlier this year.
Well, it is important to keep the history of them alive, particularly because we've noticed that the number of visitors who come to the museum that had that direct connection to them is on the decline. So the people who rode in a horse-drawn school bus to get to school or helped to plow a field with a horse, they are all aging. So sharing the stories of carriage manufacturers and the craftsmen and the people who use these vehicles every day is increasingly important. So typically when we ask visitors, what did you think or what did you love about the museum, they'll comment on the extensive collection and the large museum being the most surprising.
Over in the restoration shop, a carriage is currently being restored to its former glory for a private buyer.
The project I'm currently working on is this coach here behind me, which was built in London, England in approximately 1889. It came to Canada in 1985 as a gift from one friend to another who resided in Calgary. It sat in a small two-car garage in Calgary for about 32 years until the current owner purchased it in a garage sale. So the restoration has been focusing on returning the vehicle to like-new condition and safe to be used by people and the horses that will pull it.
If you're interested in donating an artifact, you can contact the museum directly. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Looks like a very cool place. Wow. Well, it was another cool and soggy day across much of southwestern Alberta, but the rain clouds may be leaving us fairly soon. A full look at the weather picture is coming up. Thanks so much to Mother Nature for watering our trees, lawns, and replenishing our water supply. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, those rain clouds, however, may be leaving us by Friday?
Yeah, that is when the sun will shine again. We are, for now, still looking at a 30% chance of showers overnight and into Thursday as well. High of 13 on Thursday, up to 14 degrees on Friday. That's when we're going to see those clear skies, and they are going to last for a while. If we're looking at a high of 20 degrees on a Saturday, up to 22 on Sunday. Sounds like a perfect weekend to me. 19 for a high on Monday with a mix of sun and cloud, and mainly cloudy skies on Tuesday with a high of 18 degrees. So we are still staying seasonable. That average high for this time of year, 16 degrees, average low 1, 30 degrees. That was where we were sitting back in 1991. That was the high record. The low record for this day was -10, and that was back in 2002. Sun rose this morning at 7:46, sunset this evening 6:49. We're looking at just over 11 hours of daylight, about 11 hours and 3 minutes. Okay, on the west coast, on the island there, Victoria seeing a high of 16 degrees, 13 near the water, looking at a mix of sun and cloud early in the morning and then clearing. Also could see some fog patches dissipating. 14 for a high in Vancouver, more like 18 the further inland you move though, and mix of sun and cloud in the morning and then clearing. Mainly sunny skies expected tomorrow in Edmonton, high of 17 degrees, and we're looking at early morning showers in Calgary, then clearing in the afternoon. 12 degrees for a high there with a 20k wind. Now across the prairies, we're seeing basically a mix of sun and cloud all the way around with 20 to 40k winds in all three of these prairie cities. 12 for a high in Saskatoon, 11 in Regina, and sitting at 13 degrees for a high in Winnipeg tomorrow. Now in Toronto, we're seeing a 30% chance of morning showers before clearing. Also could see some fog patches dissipating in the morning, high of 16 degrees there. Ottawa looking at a 30% chance of showers, 14 for high and 15 expected to be the high in Montreal tomorrow with some showers there as well. 60% chance of showers in both Fredericton and Halifax tomorrow, high of 13. Fredericton 17 in Halifax. Charlottetown sitting at a high of 16 degrees with a mix of sun and cloud. St. John 13 looking at 2 to 4 millimeters of rain tomorrow. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Birkenstock has set a price for its initial public offering of stock that values the German sandal maker at $8.64 billion. The 249-year-old company says it has priced its IPO at $46 per share. It began trading today on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol BIRK, B-I-R-K. The upscale sandals have a bit of a cult following, and this year got a plug from the blockbuster movie Barbie. ExxonMobil is purchasing Pioneer Natural Resources in an all-stock deal worth $59.5 billion US. It is the company's largest buyout since acquiring Mobil 20 years ago. Including debt, Exxon is committing around $64.5 billion US to the acquisition. The massive investment reinforces the Texas company's commitment to fossil fuels. Stats Canada says the total monthly value of building permits in Canada rose 3.4% in August to $11.9 billion. Gains in the non-residential sector offset modest declines in residential construction plans. Permits were issued for hospital renovations in North Vancouver and Toronto, a new university building in Kelowna, and other projects in Thunder Bay and Whitby, Ontario. Politicians across the country are looking for ways to increase the pace of new home construction in a bid to alleviate a national housing shortage. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 162 points on the day to finish at 19,663. The Dow was up 65 points to 33,804. The S&P 500 was up 18 on the day to 4376, and the Nasdaq was up 96 points to 13,659. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $2.73 on the day to $83.24 US per barrel. Natural gas was up a cent to $3.40 US. Gold was up $13.74 on the day to $18.74.13 US an ounce, and silver was up 19 cents to $22.03 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $9.66 per bushel, barley's at $7.51, canola's at $15.90, and corn is at $8.81 per bushel. Live cattle were up $1.93 to $184.50. Feeder cattle were up $2.23 to $250.18, and lean hogs were up 20 cents to $82.15. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.57 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly is not confirming whether Hamas terrorists are holding any Canadians hostage. She does say, however, that 3 Canadians are still missing and 3 were killed following Saturday's horrific terrorist attack in Gaza. Joly says Ottawa will begin to airlift Canadian citizens and permanent residents from Tel Aviv by the end of the week. Global Affairs Canada says there were just over 3,000 Canadians registered with the embassy in Israel and around 500 registered in Gaza and the West Bank. Not only Jews, but there are also a number of Christians being targeted and persecuted around the world. In certain countries, the danger is growing more and more each and every day. Minister at Large with Voice of the Martyrs, Greg Musselman, will share details shortly with BCN's Jeanette Rocher. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's local stories, check out our website, bridgecitynews.ca.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. Come and enjoy a fun and spooky time at the Fort Whoop-Up's Haunted House, October 27th and 28th. Opportunities to go through the fort's barracks are from 1 to 3 p.m. for kids and 6 to 9 p.m. for those 18 and older. Admission is $5 per person. To register, visit galtmuseum.com. Get ready for a spine-tingling Halloween extravaganza. Enjoy the hauntingly beautiful musical journey, Phantasms, with the Lethbridge Community Band Society's Gold Band, led by Mark Ward. Taking place Saturday, October 28th, beginning at 7 p.m. at College Drive Community Church. For tickets, visit lcbs.ca. Discover a new activity that you love. All are invited to Give It a Try events hosted by the Lethbridge Sport Council. It's a great opportunity to try your hand at a new sport like climbing, badminton, handball, and more. Events are free to attend. Register in advance by visiting lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/program/Give It a Try. And that's today's Bridge City News community calendar.
Well, religious persecution around the world is an ongoing issue, unfortunately. And just this weekend, we saw a surprise attack on the Israelis living near the Gaza Strip, for example. Now, the persecution of different religious groups has been going on since what seems like the beginning of time, including the persecution of Christians. But is there a way that we in Canada can be of any help to this? Joining me from the Edmonton area is Greg Musselman. He is the Minister at Large for Voice of the Martyrs Canada and host of the podcast Closer to the Fire. Welcome to Bridge City News, Greg. Great to have you back on again.
Oh, it's so good to be here. And as you mentioned, the whole situation in Israel, in Gaza has us all troubled. And there's so many things going around. But I think as we even start this is to remember that, God is working. And we remember that. But, many innocent lives are being lost. And that's the sad reality.
It's such a sad reality. And of course, that's kind of what your work passion is. Maybe tell our viewers what Voice of the Martyrs is all about and what does your organization do to help the persecuted?
Well, I think, in the name itself, the voice of the martyrs, and if you look in the biblical definition of that, it means really witness or testimony. So all that follow Jesus are martyrs, but we think of those that are actually dying for their faith or being imprisoned. And that's where Voice of the Martyrs Canada gets involved to tell their stories. And I've had the privilege of traveling to dozens of countries, interviewing hundreds and hundreds of persecuted Christians to hear their stories. And not only the things that they're going through in terms of the suffering and the persecution, but how God is working in the midst of all that. And so we bring, attention to that, and then also go into these nations and provide help and support to let them know they're not forgotten. And, as an example, I know we'll be talking about Nigeria, but to help the widows of those that have lost their husbands and children, lost their fathers, to support them so they can be self-supporting. And we just want to encourage them. So there's a lot of things that we do. And I encourage people to go to vomcanada.com to find out, how you can get involved, whether it's letter writing, supporting our projects, and sharing the stories of persecuted Christians to your friends.
Mm-hmm. Now, you, of course, focus very much on persecuted Christians, but where are we at big picture-wise when we take a look at global levels of persecution? Which religious groups are targeted the most in the world?
Well, all that I have read, it is definitely Christians, and some organizations say as much as 75% of targeted persecution against a religious group are Christians. Now, you have in some Muslim countries where you have maybe Sunni and Shia Muslims, and there is, persecution against each other. So you're seeing some of those kinds of things. And certainly, Muslims are persecuted in India. You have Pakistan, where certainly Christians are being persecuted there, as other groups are as well. And so, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 75% or so of, again, it's hard to get into the statistics because a lot of the persecution we never hear about, even with the Voice of the Martyrs. The numbers, how many Christians are killed every year, anywhere from 5,000 to 6,000, and I've seen up to 100,000. I mean, that's quite a range, but a lot of the things we don't ever hear about, they're in isolated areas. But I would say it's safe to say that Christians are the most targeted because of their religious affiliation or their identity with Jesus.
Okay. I've talked to other experts as well who have said that Jews are the most persecuted religious group in the world.
Well, they're a much smaller group than, when you look at Christians. And there's somewhere around, let's see, what did I read the other day? About 360 million Christians. It's about 14% of the Christian population around the world, face some level of persecution, whether it's imprisonment, discrimination. I mean, you go to a country like Pakistan, where they're only 2% Christian there, but, they have the lowest jobs. They're constantly discriminated against. Many of the Christians try to leave the country. But just in terms of numbers, yes, Christians would be the most. And certainly our Jewish friends are suffering as well. We've even heard stories over the last few days as a result of what's happening between Israel and Gaza. But just in terms of sheer numbers, Christians definitely would be the most persecuted.
Okay, yeah, I see. In North America, too, I know that we see a lot of Jews targeted as well. And of course, when we look at what's happening right now in Israel, specifically in Gaza, which started over this Canadian Thanksgiving weekend. We saw this surprise attack of Hamas on the Jews, and we're hearing of these horrible atrocities on civilians in their own homes. People at a music festival being ambushed. So, Greg, what's your take on all of this? Do you think that this will become a full-out war? Like, what do you think?
Well, Israel has declared it as a full-out war. Benjamin Netanyahu, prime minister of the country, and as defense minister, and they've talked about just literally flattening Gaza. We pray that doesn't happen because these are innocent people that are being killed, by the attacks that are taking place right now in Gaza. And of course, we know the hundreds, 900 Jewish people were killed, and some that were visiting the country, even to this music festival where they opened fire on these innocent people. I mean, it's absolutely horrific. And I actually got an email from a friend of mine. I've actually spoken at his church in Bethlehem, which is a part of the West Bank. So that's different than Gaza, people familiar with that part of the world. And the concern there is that, they're Palestinian Christians. So they're seen as somewhat as traitors because they've left Islam, or, they've been, for centuries and generations, they've been Christians. And so they're concerned that the attacks could come on them from the Muslims. So it's just a really difficult situation. So we need to be praying for our Jewish friends, what's going on there. We pray for the leadership of Israel that they will do the right thing. And I know it's it's a terrible situation with terrorism and all that's gone on. But there are innocent people that are losing their lives. And one of the interesting things, Jeanette, is that when I talk about Christians in Israel and the Holy Land, many of them are Palestinians from or Arab backgrounds. And so there are brothers and sisters in Christ, and we need to be praying for them, and also for the peace of Jerusalem. We are commanded in Scripture as well. This is a very dangerous situation, and it could involve other countries. We hear Iran, is backing Hamas, and then Hezbollah up in the north as well. So there's another area there that Israel is being attacked. So it's a very dangerous situation, and we need to continue to pray. I just can't emphasize that enough, and to help in whatever ways we can.
Oh, so interesting, and just so terrible too, what's happening. And Greg, speaking about Christians now, so on a global level, are things about the same, or are they getting better or worse persecution-wise? You made it sound like it's getting a bit worse at the beginning there.
It is getting worse. And, we have social media, we have, news coverage all over the world. Everybody's got a cell phone and, recording, images and getting stories out. So definitely we're getting more information about persecution of Christians. And I would also say that it's getting worse as we talk to our partners in the various countries. I won't say the place I was at, just because of security issues, but I interviewed a number of leaders from North Africa. So we're talking about Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, Libya. And they're just saying, like, things are getting worse. Now, if you know about that part of the world, up until the 7th century, that was all very Christian. And then the Arab Muslim invasions came in, and then the church was decimated. But in the last 40 or 50 years, there's been a reemergence, and North Africans have been discovering, their Christian roots. People like Tertullian and Augustine, they all came from that part of the world. And so many are coming to the Lord. But what's happened is the church has grown, and it's above ground now, and they're meeting in buildings in places like that, hotels, wherever they can meet together. Well, because of the growth of Christianity, the government, as an example, in Algeria, is closing the churches. And so the church is being forced underground. So we're seeing more of that happen all over North Africa. Then you've got the spread of Islam, and not only in Nigeria, but it's spreading to other nations like Burkina Faso. And it's because of these Islamic groups like Boko Haram, and then in Nigeria, the Fulani herdsmen, ISIS and other groups, as they're spreading into other parts of Africa, it's causing more death and destruction of Christians. Churches are being burned down. You have China, who have really come hard against the church, and we know that there's more Christians there, except I think America is the only other place where there may be more people identify as Christians. So China, the church is growing rapidly, but even the government churches, they're taking the cross down. They've got this 10-year project to have basically the Chinese Bible, taking out key things of Scripture, and even one part, we have the woman caught in adultery, where Jesus at the end says that he's a sinner too. So you're seeing all these things happen, and it's forcing compromise, and at least to some of the leaders there, as they have to give their allegiance to the Communist Party. They say our allegiance is to Jesus. Those are just a few of the examples. India, with their anti-conversion laws, the government there saying that if you're Indian, you're Hindu. And so the pressure is really being applied to Christians there. And any kind of evangelism is seen as forcing people to convert from Hinduism to Christianity. And more Christians are being arrested, and it's just causing all sorts of problems. They're being attacked, churches being burned down, Christians taken to police stations. And then again, because of these things here, social media, they get the videos and they put it on social media as a warning to other Christians in India that if you're going to, be involved in Christianity, you're going to suffer. So to answer that question, I know in a long way here, but it is increasing in terms of persecution around the world against the followers of Jesus. Social media plays into that, and then also these extremist groups as well.
Yeah, you were talking about India there, and of course the relationship between India and Canada is a little bit strained these days.
Right now, yeah.
But is there a way that Canadians can influence the Indian government in any way to provide more freedom for Christians in India?
Well, normally I would say yes, you can contact your member of parliament, but right now, I mean, we've even had our diplomats being kicked out of the country. There is that tension, with the killing of this Sikh leader in Vancouver, and the Prime Minister Trudeau has said that the Indian government was behind it. They're denying it. So there's all this tension. So right now, diplomatically, we don't have a lot of legs to stand on. But the most important thing, again, can't emphasize this enough, is to be praying. And we do pray that also that relationship with India, which is a very important country to Canada, would be normalized. We have a lot of people from Indian backgrounds living in Canada. They're, of course, very concerned as well. And we really need to be speaking up for Christians in India. So, I mean, the thing, Jeanette, is that these countries have, they call it freedom of religion, they at least outwardly like to say that, but in reality, that is not being lived out. As I mentioned, these anti-conversion laws, that if somebody leaves Hinduism to become a Christian, that's considered something that you're not supposed to be doing, and it can get you put in prison, and we're seeing this happen. But yeah, right now it's very tense, of course, with Canada and India, and so the normal channels that we would go through, even just writing to our MPs, still can do that. But right now, I don't think the Indian government's paying much attention to anything that is heard from Canada.
Yeah, that's such an unfortunate situation too. Now, you were speaking about Africa before, and you kind of, gave us a good overview of how that continent is sort of divided up with the nations amongst where the persecution is taking place. And you just recently returned from a trip to Africa. So maybe, it wasn't your first time. You've been there many times, and each time you return, you do have these stories of violence. So why are the governments there in those certain countries, Nigeria and whatnot, why don't they seem to be able to get a handle on that continuing violence over there?
Well, as you mentioned, I do a podcast, and every time I talk about Nigeria, I ask that very question: why is the government not doing more? And we have heard stories. Now, just to back up a step, is most of northern Nigeria is Muslim. Most of southern Nigeria is Christian. Now, there are Muslims living in the south. There's Christians living in the north. And so, and I've been there, as you mentioned, a number of times, been in the north. And so you have maybe a community that is Christian. So the majority could be Muslim in that, whatever state it is, Borno State, Kano State, Kaduna, or wherever it might be. So there would be mostly Muslim, but there would be Christian communities. And so those communities are often attacked because they are, as I say, the majority, if not all of them, are Christian because of some of the tension that goes on. And so these militant Islamists come in, and even heard stories of the government, troops, police, military are aware that there's some talk about an attack, and they don't do anything about it. The question is, why don't they do anything about it? Is it incompetence? They don't care? But the reality is, a lot of times these Christians are left unprotected, and that's why the casualty numbers can be so intense, and burning of churches and Christian homes. And I have interviewed dozens now of Nigerian widows whose husbands have been killed on this recent trip just a few weeks ago when I was in Nigeria teaching pastors in Kaduna State, and met some ladies whose husbands had both been killed. One just actually in the last year, one lady from a couple of years ago, her husband was a pastor. And so we're, helping them with these skills programs so that they can be self-supporting. But again, the government just doesn't seem to have the ability or the will to do anything to stop these attacks.
So interesting. And we can go on and on about this, but unfortunately we're at time here, so we're running out of time. But Greg, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Jeanette. Appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Greg Musselman is the Minister at Large for Voice of the Martyrs Canada and the host of the podcast Closer to the Fire. An assistant professor at the University of Lethbridge and a filmmaker have teamed up to release a film highlighting their work in preserving endangered plant species across Alberta. To give us a better understanding of the journey behind this film, we welcome its creator, Professor Jenny McCune. Welcome to the show today, Jenny. Great to have you on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so your movie is called The Quiet Green Creatures. I love that title. It reminds me of a little swamp monster or something, but that's not at all what we're talking about. So maybe tell us, what is the little film about? It's about 4.5 minutes long?
Yeah, it's a little video film that we put together about the research that my students are doing with endangered plants. And so the quiet green creatures is kind of a play on the idea that people often don't think about plants as creatures, but they are. They're a big component of Canada's wildlife. And so I wanted to kind of do something that would be accessible, that people could learn about what we're working on.
No, that's so interesting. What inspired you to create it?
Well, even way back when I was a graduate student, I sort of heard a lot about the importance of communicating your research beyond the academic community and communicating it to the general public. And I went to a little workshop about making these little videos, and I thought, ooh, one day I want to do that.
What a great idea. I love that. And we are in the age of communication and definitely social media and filmmaking. So what better way than to kind of showcase your work there? So how did you originally get interested in plants and botany?
Ooh, that's a great question. I grew up on a farm in Southern Ontario, and so I did a lot of gardening and went on canoe trips in the summer and things like that. But I had a really, really good biology teacher in high school that did a great job with the plant part of it. And I sort of just became fascinated with the plants, and they're different than us, right? They're sort of like aliens in a way. They don't move around like we do, and they don't communicate like we do, but they're living creatures. And so I guess, yeah, it was way back in high school when I started kind of being interested in plants.
Mm-hmm. And there's so much research, it seems, coming out right now about plants and how they, I don't know, like how they interact and stuff. It's really interesting. It's kind of fascinating. But getting back to the film, so in the film, you're basically saying that there are currently plant species in Alberta and around the world that aren't flourishing, right? So what's limiting them from thriving?
Yeah, so in Canada, we have some close to 4,000 different species of vascular plants. And the major reason that some of them are at risk of extinction is because they grow mostly in the southern part of our country, which is also where we like to live and work. And so we've been clearing a lot of their habitat for centuries to make way for our housing, our agriculture, our industry, and things like that. And so in our case, we're working a lot, we're focused on these plant species in Southern Ontario, which used to be about 80% at least covered with forest, and now, depending on what county you're in, is somewhere between 5 and 40%.
Yeah.
And so they're limited to these little chunks of forest kind of surrounded by, ag fields, cornfields, pastures, subdivisions, and cities. And so that can really take a toll on their ability to thrive, to move around the landscape. And of course, it also comes with other threats like exotic invasive species, changes in the herbivory, like are there more deer around chomping on them, things like that.
Yeah, it sounds like we're almost all competing for the same space right there.
Exactly, that's the thing. And if we can't leave, I mean, it's not just plants, it's endangered animals too.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest cause of them being endangered is us taking up more and more of their habitat. So if we can't set aside some for them, we might lose them.
Yeah. So what are the main factors putting these plants at risk? Is it humans basically?
Yeah, I would say it's almost all human caused or things that are linked up with things that humans are doing on the landscape. In some cases, we don't really know why some of them are so rare. So that's one of the things we're trying to test. So with the wood poppy that we're working with, there are only 5 populations in all of Canada. They're all in Southern Ontario, but they seem to be able to grow quite well, even in, people have planted them in their garden and they do quite well. So our hypothesis we're trying to test is maybe there is other habitat in the area that's suitable. It's just that they can't get their seeds there because their seeds are dispersed by ants. And so if you think about how far an ant could go, it's probably not going to cross a 100-acre cornfield, to get to a new place.
Exactly. Is there a specific type of plant life that you're currently trying to save, and why?
Well, Southern Ontario, Ontario in total has about 77-ish species of plants that are listed under our Federal Species at Risk Act. So there are plenty to choose from. We're focused on 2 for these trials where we're planting them. One is called the wood poppy and one is called the crooked stem aster. And so we've chosen those for various reasons, one of them being they produce tons of seeds, and so we can get seeds from those existing populations without causing any danger to the population. We wouldn't want to collect seeds from a tiny population that only produces a few every year.
Okay, well, you're an assistant professor at the University of Lethbridge. Are there any plant species around these parts, around southern Alberta, that you're specifically monitoring?
Yeah, we haven't studied any of Alberta's endangered plants. Here in Alberta, most of the plants that are listed on Canada's Species at Risk Act here are grassland plants, of course, because we're in the, down here in the south especially, it's the native vegetation is the grasslands, and those are the things that were cleared to make way for agricultural crops and things like that. So those include things like western spiderwort and the hair-footed loco weed and all these cool little grassland species. We haven't worked on any of those yet. We've done a bit of work in Waterton Lakes looking at the response of plants after the big fire that happened there in 2017. But we haven't focused on any endangered plants here yet.
Okay, and are there plants that are kind of at risk around here?
There's definitely some rare ones, and whether or not they're at risk, some of them definitively are. So I think there's 12 in total that are rare enough and at risk enough to be listed under that Federal Species at Risk Act. Those ones are definitely, on the edge just because their native grassland habitat has been so reduced over time. But then there's others that are just rare and maybe doing fine in a few places, like in the mountains. And, we don't know about very many populations, but hopefully, because they're growing high up in the alpine somewhere, they won't lose habitat, at least not to human development.
Right.
They might face a problem due to climate change if it gets too hot for them.
How do you monitor the growth of these plants, even the ones in Ontario that you're kind of looking at?
Yeah, so the ones that we're monitoring, so we're monitoring the existing populations and we're also monitoring the ones that we plant. So what we do is we mark individual plants, we give them a little name tag basically, and we track them every year. So we measure how tall they grow, how many leaves they produce, how many flowers they produce, and how many fruits they produce. So that gives us an idea of how well they're doing. Are they reproducing? Are they growing really tall? And how does that change from year to year?
Okay, no, that's interesting. Almost like a little report card there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's neat. During the process of filming, did your team encounter any challenges?
Field work is always challenging. You're out there with the mosquitoes and the humidity and the rain. I worry. So here, when I have students out here in the mountains, I worry about bears. In Ontario, I don't worry about bears. I worry about ticks. So ticks carrying Lyme disease are an issue. But while we were filming, we just had fun. I just had this little GoPro camera that I bought, and I just sort of filmed us as we were walking and planting and measuring things. And I wish that we had been there at the time of year when the wood poppy is in bloom, because it really is a spectacularly beautiful flower when it's in bloom.
Okay.
And in the film, it isn't in bloom, but it has fruits on it, so you can see the fruits, but not the flowers.
I saw the little green fruits. They weren't quite ripe yet. What time of year were you filming?
Oh gosh, when was I there? It must have been late June.
Okay, yeah, it definitely looked summery, very, very green. Yeah, but it almost looked a little rainy as well. Yeah, so basically big challenges are like the environmental elements. Pretty much.
Yeah, if you're going to be a plant ecologist, you have to be ready to spend all day out in the forest with the
100%.
mosquitoes.
There you
Yeah.
go. Now, the short film communicates the importance of biodiversity. So, what do you hope viewers will take away from it?
Well, I always try and raise the profile of plants a little bit. I think a lot of people, when they think of endangered species, they think of caribou or maybe even tigers and pandas and elephants and things like that. But I think it's important to get the word out that, endangered species include these quiet green creatures, these plants. And people love plants. It's not that we don't love plants, that people fill their houses with house plants and they get into their gardening. And so yeah, just hoping to kind of raise awareness that we also have some plant creatures that we're worried about here and that we're trying to conserve.
Okay, interesting. So, what can the average person do about all of this? Like, for instance, are there any specific actions or changes that you hope your audience will be motivated to take after watching the film?
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, the things that an ordinary person can do, like one thing that I do is I support local land trusts because they're often the groups that are helping to preserve nice pieces of habitat and so that those habitat pieces won't get developed.
Yeah.
So here in Alberta, for example, we have the Southern Alberta Land Trust Association, I think it's called SALTS. You can donate to a place like that. Also just, supporting designation of parks and protected areas and things like that, and voting for people who support that.
Okay.
But also just getting out and noticing the plants, now with apps like iNaturalist, where you can snap a picture, you can put it on the internet, and you can learn what species it is really quickly, is a great way to learn. Yeah, a great way to learn more about the plants that you have, right in your backyard or in your local park.
Yeah, for sure. Do you believe that this film could even spark an interest in the younger generation to gain a better understanding of your field?
Yeah, I hope so. I was saying it's another sort of aspect of it is, having it up on my website as kind of a tool for potential grad students to see, right? Or even undergraduates that might want to work with us. Every summer, we hire undergraduates to come out and be our field assistants. And so it's a way for them to see, what is it really like doing that job? Like, what is it like being out there in the forests for 3 months of the summer?
Yeah, for sure. Now, collaborative efforts are often very crucial in conservation projects, but are you able to maybe elaborate on some of the partnerships and collaborations in your film?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the project itself is not just me. It's a group of collaborators, including the Wilder Institute, which is based at the Calgary Zoo. They are experts in reintroducing and translocating animals, but they wanted to, support us to learn more about using this tool for plants. And then the Nature Conservancy of Canada is a really important partner because they are the ones that have the land that we're working on. So they have these intact forests that we know are going to be preserved well into the future. And then we worked with a First Nations run native plant nursery called Guyana Say, and on the Six Nations Reserve in Southern Ontario. And so they were really important because obviously we were not going to grow 5,000 plants in Alberta and drive them to Ontario. We needed a place to grow them there.
That would have been a movie in itself there, about how you even did that. And then, and then speaking of filming, you mentioned you just had a little GoPro. Did you have another filmmaker with you or somebody that you kind of collaborated with to help you edit or anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. So, I came back with just this footage that I just gathered, and I was like, okay, here I am at this university that has, a whole new media program. There must be someone that can help me. So I was put in contact with Rodrigo Henriquez, who is the director, and just sort of said, here's all this footage. Here's a script of a voiceover that I wrote.
Okay.
Can you help me?
Do something with it. Help me.
Yeah. And so he's
Amazing.
got his own little company that does that kind of thing. And he was able to edit, splice all the things together, find this great music to put in the background. And I got to be in a studio, with headphones on, doing the voiceover.
No,
So it was
it was
really
great. Do you plan on doing any more films with Rodrigo in the future?
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah. And we've got more work coming up, both in Ontario and here in Southern Alberta. So it was a great experience. And I think, yeah, it's just a nice way to communicate what you're doing in a short, digestible piece.
Definitely. Yeah. It's not like a long documentary. It's just really short and to the point. And no, it was great.
Yeah.
Johnny, thanks so much for your time today. It looks like we're out of time here.
Oh, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
No, it was great to kind of understand a little bit more about the work that you do. So thank you for that. Jenny McCune is an assistant professor at the University of Lethbridge and a botanist who has worked to protect endangered plant species across Alberta and Ontario, and I guess beyond. So great to have her on today. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.